my name's Alicia. Welcome to my channel. Get comfortable, get a cup of tea or coffee. I have mine, but it's decaf. So get comfortable. Today we're talking about my favorite subject, and that is Disney World and Disneyland. So let's go. I'm finally wearing my new sweater from Stony Clover, the Disney Princess sweater. I absolutely love it. It's so comfortable. Disney World versus Disneyland. This is something that many of my friends and family have asked me, and I have had a lot of thoughts about it, but now it's time to condense those thoughts into 10 points. And I just recently went with my husband. We went to both parks in January of 2024. So I have it fresh in my mind, and I'm going to tell you the differences, what I think of them, and a combined perspective from both me, my husband, and my cousin, who is also Disney obsessed, maybe more than I am. And I have condensed all of our Aussie perspectives, and I'm going to tell you the differences in our opinion, traveling to the USA from Australia, the differences between these two parks. So me and my husband, we both love Disney World and the Disney parks. In the last 4 years since we have been together, we've been to Disneyland in Paris, we've been to Disneyland in Tokyo, Disneyland Anaheim, and also Disney World in Orlando, and this year we're going to Disneyland in Hong Kong very, very soon. So let's get right into it. Number one difference is the obvious one, and I'm going to get the obvious out of the way first, and that is the size. Comparing Anaheim Disneyland to Orlando Disney World, it is a totally different scale. To be specific, I'm looking it up. Disneyland Resort in Anaheim covers about 500 acres. Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida is almost 25,000 acres. So self-explanatory. If you just look at the two on a map, you can see the size difference. It's vastly different. Disneyland is very tiny compared to Disney World. Moving on to point number two, from an Australian perspective, I think that Orlando, being in the Disney World bubble, is an effect that I did not get while we were in Disneyland in Anaheim. In Anaheim Disneyland parks and in California Adventure, we felt like we were just in an amusement park for the day in the real world. It was not as it was in Orlando, where we felt we were very immersed in a totally different surreal world. Disney World was better to have an escape for reality, whereas Anaheim, I did not get as much of an escape feeling. I felt very aware that I was still in California in the USA. Maybe that is because I had not been to Disney World before and it was my first time, whereas in Disneyland LA, I had been there before. So I knew a bit more of what to expect. In LA, when you're in Disneyland or in California Adventure, you could just walk out of the park gates and you were back in the real world. You were back in the city, very easy to get back to reality in California. Versus Orlando, it was very immersive and you felt like you were in the Disney bubble a lot more in Orlando. Downtown Disney in LA, once you walk out of that strip, you're back to reality straight away. Because it's so close to the city, or different streets, different malls, different sectors of LA, it's very easy to get back into reality. But it's also easy to get back into the bubble. Whereas Orlando is a lot more spread out, it's surrounded by all these highways, so you have to drive further out and it's harder to get back into the Disney bubble. So that's another point to consider, but overall I would say that Orlando was a lot more immersive, whereas LA, it's a lot more like you're still in reality and in the real world. The third difference between Disneyland Anaheim and Disney World in Orlando, And I think this is another obvious one. From an Australian perspective, keep in mind, the cost is a lot more to go to Orlando Disney World than it is to go to Anaheim Disneyland Park. The reason for that is, for Australians, at least for New South Wales people, traveling to Orlando, it is further away, and usually to get there we have to make a stopover. When you're flying there, you have to have a layover in either Los Angeles or San Francisco before you can get to Florida. So that extra stopover in the plane is going to make it more costly to travel to Orlando rather than Disneyland. I'm sure a lot of people maybe will get to Los Angeles and then have some family there they can stay with, or maybe you want to drive, I don't know. But for us, we had to fly from Los Angeles to Orlando before we could get to Disney World. Although the cost is more expensive to get to Orlando, there are a lot more options for more budget hotels or resorts in Orlando than there are in Los Angeles around the Anaheim area. So you can save on hotels, I think, a lot easier in Orlando than you can in Los Angeles. But you do have to weigh that up and consider your budget for both options. Example of a more budget-friendly hotel in the Disney World area in Florida is the Swan or the Dolphin Hotel, which are good neighbor hotels to Disney World, and you can still get your extra magic hours, they call it. So you can go into the Disney World parks earlier or leave later compared to other guests who are not staying in a Disney hotel or a Disney Good Neighbor hotel. So that is one way to save on your accommodation if you are going to Disney World. Another more costly expense to consider if you're going to Disney World is, because there are 4 parks in Disney World, you're going to have to pay more for tickets to get into those parks. So park entry for each of the parks is an added expense. In Disneyland, there's only 2 parks, Disneyland and California Adventure, but in Disney World there's 4 parks. There's Magic Kingdom, there's Hollywood Studios, there's Animal Kingdom, and there's the Epcot Park, as well as some water parks if you wanted to go there. But each of those parks has an additional ticket fee. It's not an all-in-one thing. You still have to buy different park tickets like you would if you were going to Universal Studios for one day and Disneyland for another day. It's not like you can get access to all 4 parks just because you're going to Disney World. You have to pay for each park ticket separately. The 4th point, from an Australian perspective on the differences between Disneyland and Disney World, is that Orlando is less like a capital city like Sydney versus Anaheim in Los Angeles. So what I mean by that is, when we were in Los Angeles, in Anaheim Disneyland and California Adventure, we felt as if we could have been in Sydney or Melbourne, we could have been in London, we could have been in Berlin or Paris. It felt like our own city at home. It didn't feel like you were really in another country. When you were in Orlando, you felt like you were in another country compared to Australia. There wasn't much differences between Sydney and Los Angeles. And I'm not saying it's good or bad either way. It's just from my perspective and observation that Los Angeles was a lot more like being in any other capital city. Orlando felt like a bit of a country town. You're further away from a CBD. Whereas if you're going to Anaheim Disneyland, you're probably there to see Los Angeles. You're probably going to Los Angeles to explore Los Angeles, and Disneyland is just something you do as an activity on one of those days. Whereas Orlando Disney World, if you're going there, you're going to Disney World or Universal Studios. There's not much more to do in Orlando unless you were to drive out very far out of Disney World. To sum that up, Orlando had less capital city vibes and Anaheim was a lot more like being in any other capital city. The fifth difference that I want to point out in my observations is that in Orlando Disney World, the cast members felt like they were a lot more in character and they were swooped up in the Disney bubble just as much as the guests were. I think the cast members in Orlando in Disney World are a lot more used to dealing with tourists and tourists that haven't been there before, because they knew the questions before you were going to ask them. They sort of anticipated every question that a new tourist would ask. Whereas in Anaheim, I got the feeling that they expected you to know what to do. So I think in Anaheim, the cast members are used to having locals there. And in Orlando Disney World, the cast members are used to guests being new, being there from all over the world. And I think the cast members in Orlando, at least in the hotels, and specifically in the resort we were staying at, Pop Century and the French Quarter, I felt the cast members there really knew how to make their guests feel like they had it all under control and the guests were well taken care of in Orlando. The sixth difference between the parks is another obvious one, but that is the size of the castles. So in Anaheim, in Disneyland, I think it is a lot smaller if you didn't know, but if you just look at pictures side by side, you can see how much smaller the castle is in Anaheim. Not to say it's not gorgeous, because it's absolutely breathtaking for me. But the other difference is what you can do inside the castles. In Anaheim, you can walk through the castle, and it is a walkthrough experience of Snow White. So it's not a ride, it's just a walkthrough experience going up a little passageway. And in Magic Kingdom, however, inside the castle there, you can eat in there. It's a dining experience. You can make a reservation and eat inside the Magic Kingdom castle. And we did that, we ate there, and it is Cinderella's Royal Banquet, I believe it's called. And you make a reservation and you can actually eat inside the castle for Magic Kingdom inside Disney World in Orlando. One of my most favorite experiences is eating inside the castle at Magic Kingdom. We had lunch there, me and my husband, and it was just breathtaking, looking out through the window and seeing the entire park in front of you. I'll never forget that experience. It was so cool, it made my day. You can't do that in Anaheim, in the castle there, unfortunately, but it is still nice to walk through and have the experience of looking at Snow White's castle. The seventh difference from an Australian's perspective between Disneyland and Disney World is the amount of choices you have. So in Orlando Disney World, there are a lot more choices, and the types of choices are the choices for accommodation, which I've already slightly talked about, the choices for where to eat, the restaurants and dining. You have so many options of places to eat in Disney World. And the third choices I'm referring to is the choices for merchandise. So if you haven't seen my videos on my channel before, I've done a lot of videos from my hauls looking at all the merchandise I purchased in both Disneyland and Disney World. But there are so many choices for merch in Disney World, and Disneyland, it is a bit more limited. So that's a big difference and can be important, especially if you have picky eaters. You're going to find a lot more suitable options in Disney World versus Disneyland. Not to say there'll be nothing you can eat, there's plenty, but the amount of choices, the sheer amount of restaurants just in one of the parks alone, but let alone 4. There's 4 parks in Disney World. There's so much choice. You could eat there every day for a year and you still wouldn't have tried everything. So the amount of choices is ridiculous. So that's something cool about Orlando. You can do so much and still go back there for another vacation a year later and still haven't done everything that they have to offer. We also were able to go to the outlets in Orlando, the Disney outlet, and they have a lot of merch there too. So that's one thing that we didn't find in Disneyland. In Anaheim area, we didn't see any outlets, but in Orlando, there are so many outlets for Disney merchandise you can check out too. If you want to see some of the merchandise I bought from Disneyland and Disney World, have a look at those videos on my channel. There's a lot of merch to buy. I probably bought all of it, but they come out with new stuff all the time. They also have some similar items on shopdisney.com. Number 8 is the snacks. So the differences in snacks. So I think from my perspective and my husband's, we agree that the snacks are better in Disneyland. So that's the churros, the ice cream, the waffles. We preferred the snacks in the Disneyland park in Anaheim versus the snacks in Walt Disney World in Orlando. And I also asked my cousin, who's Disney obsessed like me, and she agreed. She said the snacks were definitely better in Disneyland Anaheim. So that's just our perspective. The churros in Anaheim we had were really good. My husband loved them. We didn't find good churros in Orlando, but I am advised that they do have some in Animal Kingdom in the Nomad Lounge. You can get churros in Disney World in Orlando, but we didn't eat them personally. But my cousin did try them and she still agrees that the churros in Anaheim are better. So there you go. We did try the ice cream sandwiches in both parks and they were equally the same. We have had the turkey leg and we thought it was not good at either parks. And there are also the pickles that are the same in quality in both parks. So that's another snack if you like pickles. I don't like them personally, but apparently they're equally the same in both parks. My favorite Disney snack that I ate during our whole trip was at the Disney French Quarter Resort in Disney World in Orlando, and that is the beignets. But overall, I would say the snacks are still better if I had to generalize in Disneyland in Anaheim. Number 9 is the planning. So the main difference I found is the planning involved. So Disney World requires a lot more planning than going to Disneyland in Anaheim. And I say that because I did not expect that to be the case before I started planning my trip. But the more I researched, the more I found out and learned for myself is that I was really underestimating the amount of planning involved. We did use a travel agent to book our tickets and accommodation for both cities, but because I had already used her for Disney World, I just continued on with her for Disneyland because it was in the same trip. But definitely in the future, I know that I can book Disneyland myself. I used the travel agency called Academy Travel. Definitely, I couldn't have done it all myself and stayed sane. And I'll put her details in the description of this video in case you want to contact her. And I did get quotes from different travel agencies before looking to Academy Travel, but she worked out to have the best prices for me. So I went with Academy Travel to book our trip. Disney World has so much planning involved that it can be overwhelming, and I highly recommend using a travel agent. But if you are booking a trip to Disneyland in Anaheim only, I think it's simple to do it yourself and you wouldn't need a travel agent. The other difference between the parks is the amount of time that you need and can spend in the Disney parks. So Disneyland in Anaheim and California Adventure, it could be done in a day if you park hop between the two. Whereas Disney World, you definitely can do it in 2 days and go to all 4 parks, but I would not recommend that at all. And I would say the minimum to go to the Disney World parks is 4 days, and that's 1 day for each park. A lot of people only leave half a day to do the Animal Kingdom park, But because it can be very tiring, the amount you have to walk around to get to each park, I would allow for some downtime and some rest time to go to your resort between the parks and rest and have a break. I would think 4 days is the minimum. You should definitely go for longer if you're going to Disney World in Orlando. I think a nice amount of time to do the parks is 6 days, but I did it across 7 days and we stayed in Orlando for a total of 10 days. So we did Magic Kingdom 3 times, Epcot we did twice, Hollywood Studios 1 day, and Animal Kingdom 1 day, and we had some rest days in between. It was so worth it, and I could have spent more time there if I wanted to, but I was limited with work. So I found 10 days to be a great amount of time to be in Orlando, and I would have loved to stay longer. But I think doing every park in 1 day is the minimum you should be thinking about for Disney World. If you can do 2 full days in Disneyland, that would be fantastic, because then you can do Disneyland Park for 1 day and California Adventure for a separate day. I wouldn't advise squishing them all into 1 day, especially if you have young kids. They need to rest and take a break, recuperate. It's nice to split it out across 2 days. Not even if you have kids, even myself as a grown woman, I need to have breaks and rest and recuperate and get ready for the next day. Because you're walking around so much, it's so exhausting. You need to rest and recover, otherwise it's not going to be enjoyable. I did California Adventure on a separate day when we went, but we did have to leave early to get our flight in the evening, so we didn't get to see the show at night, which is disappointing. But I'll definitely make my way back there to do it another time. So number 11 bonus point is that the parks in Orlando, if you're going to Disney World, are a lot more versatile and they have a lot more experiences that are enjoyable for other people, not only Disney fans. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of other rides and experiences and shows that are enjoyable for people who might not be all about Disney. For example, you have Animal Kingdom Park, which is very non-Disney-fied. Is that a word? Animal Kingdom Park is great for people who aren't all hyped up about the Disney princesses and Disney IP. So that's one thing that's great for people who aren't all about Disney. The other thing that makes it versatile is different experiences like the Indiana Jones experience. This is another stunt spectacular, they call it, which is a show. And that's a great experience for someone who might not be all about the Disney IP all the time. The other thing that makes it more versatile is different shows like the Muppets experience. You also have Universal Studios in Orlando, which could suit someone better. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe to my channel.